Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who, as you well know, has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Now, in this video, I would like to talk to you about the political philosophy, and in particular, the philosophy of libertarianism. You know, don't step on snake, all that good stuff. So, and in particular, I have, my point here is that I think that in modern libertarianism, there are two main problems, or at least two, very big problems. And in particular, and we'll discuss them later. So one of them is the, I would say, philosophical, foundational problem. And the other one is more like political, practical problem, right? You can always also say that it's more like biological, but we'll get to that, don't worry. Of course, if you would have enough patience. So let's get started, I guess. So the first problem that I call philosophical or foundational problem is, I believe, it stems from the fact that libertarianism depends a lot on the subject, you know, in pretty much like the classical philosophical sense of, 17th century, even 18th century, etc., etc. So, if you read the most prominent, foundational philosophical work in libertarianism, which is Ludwig von Mises' book, Human Action, you would see that his basically two main postulates are that subject exists and subject acts. And from these two postulates, he kind of derives the whole more or less philosophy of libertarianism and, the idea that the free market is the way to go, that, the voluntary cooperation of people would bring the most benefit for the society, all right? So I wouldn't doubt the conclusions that he arrives at, but I have severe doubts, let's say, about one of these axioms, the subject exists. So it was okay in again 17th century for the paradigm of modernity to consider the free will, subject, that kind of stuff to exist. All right, so it was kind of okay. I think I've talked about that in my previous video, one of the other ones, how, at the start of modernity, we kind of divided all the world into, free subjects versus inanimate objects, the society versus nature and so on and so forth. So it was kind of okay in modernity to consider the subject as something genuine, But we're already living in kind of a postmodern world, the philosophy is very different right now. And I think it's not very valid to even speak about the subject today. It's more about, again, kind of returning to one of my previous videos. I'm not even sure which one exactly, maybe exactly the previous one. I don't know, to be honest. The world is now more about networks, the network really seems to be the best way of describing the world, rather than, isolated subjects and objects and the action of a subject on the object and so on and so forth. So I think it might be stated today that a subject, a being with a free will, that might be well informed and might decide for himself or herself, is more of an illusion rather than reality today. It's more it's very problematic. That's basically my point. And kind of what kind of hurts me a lot about it is that libertarians, at least the ones that I've encountered, they kind of neglect that. They in philosophical terms, they're still, again, almost like in 19th century. Again, returning to my point about scientists, it's the same story here. Yeah, but I believe it's a very difficult problem. And even if you think that like this whole post-modernity, right, it's just some wicked stuff that has nothing to do with us, it's, you know, an invention of evil Marxists or whatever, well then, like, even some real world examples might show you where the subject is really problematic, like it's a problem rather than, you know, something that we can just postulate. And the most prominent example would be, like, if we try to deconstruct the notion of subject, we go to the very basis of it. Like, when does the subject appears, right? Where and when does it appear? And obviously it's very tightly connected to all the problems with children, right? So, and it has been a problem for libertarianism for like 100 years at least. Like, what the hell are we going to do with children? Like, are children subjects, or are they not? Like, how do we treat them properly in our political philosophy and so on? And it can be really clearly stated. And again, this is only like a special case of the problematic character of the subject in the first place, right? So in case of children, you really cannot say whether they are subjects or not, right? Do they have like really free will? Are they capable of taking responsibility for their own actions? Can they engage in really voluntary interactions with others, or are they not entirely conscious, and etc.? So and we have a lots of problems here, like abortion obviously is one of the subjects of, you know, modern political debate. Like, is this fetus a subject already, or is it not? Is it kind of alive? Is it a human being at all? Those are all very important philosophical problems, right? So we cannot just solve them by, you know, postulating, okay, a fetus is a human being since, like, how many, I don't know, 10th week of pregnancy or whatever. Doesn't matter. Like it doesn't seem to be a really solid foundational you know, notion. Like how do we know, right? And so on. Then issues like vaccination are also important. Like if a child is a free subject in you know, libertarian philosophy, like, let's just assume that it's a free subject. So then a child might decide for themselves, like, whether they should be vaccinated or not. But if a child is not a subject, like, who's going to decide? Like, how can we solve this problem? It's really problematic. And again, as I've said, it relates to the more general problem of the existence of subject, right? Then you might talk about genetic modification, like, do we have the right to adjust a child's genes, right? Because whatever happens later, it's going to be a different subject / object / whatever than without that modification, right? It's kind of obvious. So what the hell is going on here, right? And the other problem, like even if you can say probably that, okay, just don't mess with nature, okay? Like, genetic modification is evil, blah blah blah. But even if you look at, you know, regular, like, family, regular, you know, sexual intercourse, like, when you're choosing a partner to have a child with, you're already kind of tampering with your future child, right? He's gonna have different sets of genes depending on what partner you're gonna choose. So it's really super complicated. I'm telling you, it's like a node of various philosophical problems of like what a human being is, what a mind is, what is a soul, like, where's the mind, and so on and so forth. So and this is a big problem again. It all kind of pushes this notion that we can just postulate the existence of free subjects into nothing. Like, no, we cannot. Like, a subject is a problem today. It's not a postulate, right? So yeah, this is, I believe, one of the like main problems, like probably the most like foundational problem of libertarianism. Like again, the very existence of the subject. And even if you look at adults, you know, can we say that adults behave like free subjects? Is their behavior not determined by anything, you know, and so on and so forth? So yeah, it's really problematic. So, but again, I should stress that it's not a problem of only libertarianism. You see, it's a problem of the whole paradigm, if you like, of modernity. So libertarianism in this case is like it's not worse than, you know, socialism, fascism, whatever you name it. Like they're all in the same conditions in that sense, because the disappearance of the subject kind of ruins all of our political philosophy that has been developed like basically until 1950s. But even after that, even after the, you know, the start of post-modernity, when people started realizing that all these modernity's notions about, you know, subjects and objects are not valid anymore, we don't have any new political theory since then, you know. And it's a problem, as I've said. Like it's a very big problem. But if you look at, like, say, how socialists try to solve this problem, right? They're saying, okay, we embrace postmodernity, so there is no free subject, let's say. So, well, good for us, you know, because, you know, socialists' point in the first place was that we suppress you, basically. We tell you what to do. And since you're not a free subject, well, okay. Well, who cares? You weren't a free subject before that, because even before that, we told you what to do. So now you're just, you know, like a bio-robot who's going to, you know, like satisfy our needs, basically implement our commands and so on. But well, I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous, because, like, if you try to deconstruct who are we, you know, all these sages that, you know, all these socialists always have some, you know, smart government that kind of tells stupid people how they should behave, right? So if we deconstruct this smart government, we'll see that it's also not a subject, right? It's also a bunch of bio-robots in that narrative, right? So they're also determined, they're also not even like free, they're not conscious, and so on and so forth. So all these socialistic sages that should plan, you know, centralized planning, all that good stuff, what other people should do in order to, you know, achieve the the heavenly socialism, heaven on earth, and all that stuff, it doesn't really work. That's what I'm saying. So the downfall of a subject ruins not only libertarianism, but all the other political philosophies of modernity. That's what I'm saying. And it's actually quite funny that like it was actually kind of realized even before that, but in the sense that even in modernity, when people realize that, well, okay, like, how does one person, what kind of right one person has to tell others how to behave, right? So this is basically the basis of socialism. Like, you have a Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Hugo Chavez, whoever, who tells others how they should behave, right? But the question was, like, what kind of right does he have? So, and from that stems, like as the answer to that stems this cult, you know, this religious following of these wise sages, you know, the like heroic revolutionaries, like Che Guevara, you know, and so on, like who kind of have some connection to divine. So as they have this connection, this godlike light streams onto them, they have some sort of privilege to command other people, right? So this is a very prominent feature of any kind of socialistic regime, even though they would never admit that, right? That they need that irrational element to kind of cope with the very fact that the people are unequal, right? There are better people and there are worse people in socialism anyway, because how else would you justify any kind of planning, you know, when one person decides for other people? But okay, this is just a funny moment. And well, okay, kind of returning to that subject of a subject, I would say that another very prominent practice, I'm kind of trying to illustrate why socialism also doesn't work without a free subject, all right? So another very interesting practice that follows from that in socialism is that, well, I would call that, you know, prevention by amputation. So let's say, like, a socialist is like a doctor, right? He tries to cure the society because, well, obviously he's much smarter than everyone else. He has the right to decide what kind of, you know, how people should behave and so on. So he says, well, okay, let's say you have an arm, right? Well, a lot of bad things might happen to your arm. Like you can break your bone or something, you can be bitten by some poisonous spider, whatever. So to make sure that doesn't happen, let's just amputate your arm, like in the first place. Like this is the most frequent recipe of socialists for everything, basically. So they say, well, okay, say we have free subjects, but free subjects might be tricked by marketing, let's say, if we have a free market, for example. It's bad, right? We shouldn't allow them to be fooled by marketing. So we should cut those freedoms so that people wouldn't be able to even decide for themselves in the first place. Therefore, they wouldn't be able to make any, you know, bad decisions. We'll make all the decisions for them, all right? We're smart, we're socialists. We have that connection with, you know, the godlike whateverness. Or, you know, you might, like, if you have money on the free market, you might, you know, kind of make bad decisions, buy bad products. You may invest in a financial pyramid, kind of referencing my previous video. So let's just take your money away. Why do you even need them, right? Money is singular in English, right? So let us take your money away, and we're gonna decide what kind of goods and services you receive. Money is not really needed, right? Because you might make a mistake, but obviously we don't make any mistakes. We're free subjects, and you're just you're a bi-robot, basically. This is like, that's how the situation looked in modernity. But in post-modernity, when the subject dissolves, it kind of becomes obvious that this myth of this, you know, godlike connection of these sages, of these leaders of socialism, it also dissolves. Like, they're also irrational, they have no idea what they're doing, and so on and so forth. So yeah, there you go. It's kind of, well, I'm still kind of stomping on that point that the downfall of modernity not only kills libertarianism, but also kills socialism and fascism and whatever, all those other political theories, I guess. All right, well, a lot more can be said, you know, about the downfalls of socialism in the modernity, even. Not even talking about post-modernity. Here I'm trying to be more focused on libertarianism proper. So I would say, kind of as a conclusion to that first problem, that libertarianism, in my opinion, is actually the best that modernity can offer. And it's not the fault of libertarianism that modernity itself crumbles, all right? It kind of breaks into pieces. So, yeah, all the other competitors also crumble. But it's still a problem for libertarianism, like what to do next. How do we arrange the most basic concepts later? I have some vague hope that, you know, this modern decentralized society, like all these networks, you know, internet and whatever, might bring some, you know, justification, I guess, for libertarianism. Like, well, in a poetic way, I guess you can say that, you know, okay, my subject doesn't exist, all right? So, okay, that this is postmodernism's point. But your subject also doesn't exist, all right? Again, for the same reason. But my subject doesn't exist in a different way than your subject, right? So we're still different, and just let it go, you know? Let these networks kind of grow naturally. Don't you know, cut them off with some violent aggression through the means of government, through the means of socialism, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, maybe some sort of exit might be found somewhere here. At least I hope so. All right, so I guess that's all for the first problem, but let's talk about the second one. As I've said, it's more practical, more political, and more biological, probably. And this problem, it kind of stems, well, we should look at really at the recent history, like recent 100 years or about so. I would claim that in the recent, again, 100 years or about so, there has been a definite rise in socialistic tendencies, in statism, you know, in interventionism, and so on. And it's really hard to miss, you know, if you look close enough. Like, if you look at the United States, at the year 1900, what was probably the end of this, you know, Gilded Age. It was the end of really strong economic growth, and so on. When people started implementing various means of intervening into the economy through, you know, based on these ideas of German socialists, basically. So you've had these anti-monopoly laws, you've had the foundation of the central bank, you know, the Fed, which mysteriously have led to the biggest economic crisis 15 years later, when you know the economy was overflowed with money, you know, printed by the Fed, and all these investment bubbles appeared, all right, and obviously it's the blame of capitalism. I mean, the capitalism is the reason, right? The capitalism created the central bank. Yeah, definitely that's the case. All right, and so in the recent 100 years, we've observed that more and more interventions of the government into economy have took place. And well, I've already mentioned all these cyclical crises of capitalism, which are actually crises of interventionism, created by the nationalization of banks, and so on, and the migrant crisis, you know, in Europe and other Western countries, caused by welfare, which is, you know, a socialistic institution, and so on. So indeed, we've seen this prominent rise in welfare spending and budget deficit and all that good stuff. And I believe, and it's kind of my working hypothesis, that this has been the consequence of basic biology, if you like. Again, I've kind of said that we're going to be talking about biology only a little bit. My next video is going to focus on that a little bit more, or quite a lot more, actually. So, and what do I mean by basic biology? And yeah, well, okay. So let's take a look at some history, all right? So I believe that in general, the modern society, like the way it looks right now, it's the product of the dissolution of the so-called nuclear family, you know, a husband and a wife and their kids. You know, previously we've had this so-called extended family when the majority of people lived in rural areas and made, you know, agriculture and that kind of stuff. So they've lived in large communities. Then as industrialization kicked in, people moved into the cities and they formed these nuclear families, much smaller units of society, so to speak. And now even the nuclear family dissolves because we have all these, you know, new technologies like informational era, again, post-industrial era, if you like. And now even the society the nuclear family dissolves. And like definitely one of the most prominent blows to the nuclear family was made in the year 1960 when, you know, the birth control pill was introduced. So we've had all this, you know, promiscuity, all this wonderful music, sexual revolution, that was all basically caused by the birth control pill, and so on. So yeah, really technology impacted our society quite a lot, and now we live in quite a different society than even say 60 years ago. All right, so now really we have all these skyrocketing divorce rates, single motherhood, and all that, I believe, creates conditions. It's actually kind of hard to tell where are the conditions and where is the result. It's kind of, you know, works both ways. But that way or another, it's all accompanied by the ever-growing role of the government, you know. So the government spending, the welfare, taxes, obviously, it all rises with you know, the dissolution of the nuclear family. And again, it follows from basic biology that it's just really just another tool of redistribution of wealth from men to women. And what I mean by that is like, well, in nuclear family, what happened? Like a man was doing most of the work, right? He was earning the money or, you know, bringing any kinds of resources to the family, right? And the woman was the beneficiary of these resources and the children, obviously, too. So it was a sort of a redistribution of resources earned by a man to the woman, right? So the family was an institution of redistribution of these resources, essentially. Well, economically speaking, I mean, not talking about anything else. But since the nuclear family started to dissolve with all these, you know, technological progress, the changes in society and so on, some other instrument was needed in order to continue to redistribute the wealth, the resources from men to women. And again, the very necessity of such redistribution is based on basic biology, but we'll talk about that a bit later in the next video. So the government now has become such a tool. So now a government takes man's money or other resources anyway, and redistributes them to women. That's what's happening basically. So we might say that modern woman doesn't really need a family in that sense. Like the government does that work for her, right? But like in a way, you know, modern feminism, like since 1960s, has become somewhat of an analog for a wife, you know, in a nuclear family. So feminism kind of advocates for all women to the government to redistribute more resources to them. Like you know, in a nuclear family, you could have a wife who was nagging her husband, or, you know, chewing the rag, or how do you call it, and kind of demanding more and more resources from her husband. And now we have feminism doing the same thing, but on the level of the whole society, where the government acts as this tool of redistribution from the men in general to women in general, right? So it's a really strong analogy, I believe, and it's kind of cool. But the problem is that men now, well, in a family, they've had authority because, well, it was clear that a man brings all the resources into the family. But now, women kind of take these resources for granted, right? And they advocate towards government to oppress men more and more, right? To deliver more and more resources just because, you know, just because they're women. And again, this is very natural. It follows from the basic biological patterns. So it's not some sort of conspiracy. It's just natural instincts at work, natural cultural patterns also. So the government really, the modern socialistic governments, they play a role of this redistributor of men's resources towards women. This, you know, steel boot of a government that provides many privileges to women and kind of oppresses men more and more. Like if you don't believe that the men are oppressed economically again, well then look at the data. That's my best advice. Like, look at the data that shows that 85% of consumer decisions are made by women today, right? That the men are the net taxpayers. So basically the budget is the taxes from men. Whereas women are the net tax receivers. They're kind of the beneficiaries of the whole machinery of government, right? Like one example was in Denmark, when they've tried to evaluate how much of their welfare system would kind of benefit or not, depending on if a family gives birth to a boy or a girl, like what kind of difference for the society would make, you know, in terms of income and so on. So it turned out that a boy would bring to the budget about 600,000 crowns or about so, and a girl would take from the budget about 1.6 million crowns. So a boy would pay for a girl, and not only that, but the girl would demand like twice more on top of that. Right, and I mean, it's kind of, again, speaking about, you know, the sustainability of socialism and the welfare state. And again, it's all biological. It's all really instinctive, and men are kind of glad to do that, I guess. Although they might not be glad on, you know, individual level when they encounter all the horrors of modern feminism with the help of our big daddy government and so on. But anyway, like the point I'm trying to make here really is that you can't deny all that just by pure rationality. You know, you cannot read a book by Mises or Rothbard and kind of decide that, yeah, this is wrong, right? Even men can do that. Like, men like women, believe it or not. They want to help them in a way. But this whole machinery has become so impersonal and so cruel that it becomes clearer and clearer how weird it is, how bad it is for a whole civilization. But again, probably I'll talk about that in the next video. But anyway, it's really funny to me to see how Marxists themselves are even to this day, they keep stating that a woman is economically oppressed. Like, really, if women make like 85% of market decisions, and even if you assume that, you know, even if you take into account this so-called gender wage gap, pay gap, whatever, which states that basically women earn like 23% more, or less, than men. which means that women have less money and yet they spend much more than men, right? So this is just ridiculous. Like, where this money is coming from? Like, obviously from men, or not. Like, you know, logic is the tool of patriarchy, right? So maybe it's not that clear, and so on and so forth. So yeah, Marxists are they would probably never acknowledge that men are actually net taxpayers, that men are actually sustaining the government, and to their own demise, so to speak, and in favor of women. Yeah. But I guess I'm kind of demanding too much of Marxists. Anyway, that way or another, this is a big problem. That's my point at the moment. And I think that in general, in modern political discourse, there are more or less like two prominent positions, like the conservative one and then the socialistic one, right? So the conservatives propose to return back. They say, well, you know, let's lessen the government a little bit, and let's use the old institution of family to keep redistributing the resources to women on an individual level, right? But the socialists say, no, let's get rid of the family. We'll make everything work through the government, right? And yeah, this is pretty much the two main positions. But like the extra individualistic position of libertarians, like, just get the hell away from me, it doesn't really work. In some sense, conservatives might be allies, you know, at least tactical allies for libertarians, because yeah, well, at least they're advocating for less government. But still, the political support for libertarianism would be much less anyway, because conservatives might, you know, allow some government spending and so on and so forth. So some of the women's electorate would vote for them too, but libertarians are kind of too radical for that, you know. And by the way, just so you know, the women are the majority of voters, right? So if women are the majority of voters and they are the beneficiaries of this socialism, basically, of higher taxes, then it's not a big miracle, right, that we have socialism and higher taxes, and the economy crumbles more and more as the men are more and more oppressed and can provide less and less resources because they're basically, you know, choked by these taxes and regulations. But okay, and other privileges for women. All right. Yeah, so this is a very hard problem, I believe. And I don't think it's gonna be solved anytime soon. Like, I think socialism is going to progress more and more until the whole society would crash, would burn in flames, civil war, world war, you name it. Like I really think it's not that far ahead. Yeah, my next video is going to be about gender. I'll talk about a little bit more about why is it the case that resources should be distributed from men to women, and so on and so forth. Hopefully we'll try to figure it out. But so far, I wish to conclude this video. And boy, it's gonna be much shorter than the previous one. It's so cool. So much for this, you know, 10-hour rendering time and so on. So to sum it up, I would say that modern libertarianism has two major problems. Perhaps not the most important problem. I would say that actually these are the most important problems. So the first problem is kind of a foundational philosophical one. It deals with the problem of the existence of subject in philosophical terms. Like, what is a free subject? Can it act freely? How do we define it? When does it appear? So on and so forth. Whereas, you know, the whole libertarianism rests on this free subject. And this is a big problem. And the second problem is of a more practical or political or biological dimension. It is the fact that the women are currently the majority of voters, and they are the beneficiaries of modern socialism and welfare, and therefore it's gonna be really, really hard to change this situation. The best that libertarians can do is to ally with conservatives who advocate for the same type of redistribution, but on a smaller scale, on the scale of a nuclear family. But again, the nuclear family is already outdated. It's already the thing from the past. Like, you know, if the majority of marriages end in the divorce, and the majority of adults are not even married, well, yeah, we're heading towards a pretty interesting times. That much I can tell. So an important thing to remember in this chaos is that the eons are closing.